Tonight, we walk slowly into the soft green landscape of medieval England. There are no factory chimneys yet, no railway whistles, no electric glow in cottage windows. Instead, there are open skies stretching above long, uneven fields. There is the sound of wooden wheels grinding against dirt. There are church bells drifting across damp morning air. And somewhere in that landscape, you wake. Not as a knight in polished armor, not as a lord seated beneath carved oak beams, but as a serf, bound to land you do not own, working soil that does not belong to you, living within rhythms older than memory. In this quiet journey, we will move gently through the structure of medieval English life. We will begin in the mud of the open fields, where barley bends in the wind and your back bends with it. We will step into the ambitions of conquerors, the shadow of plague, the slow revelations of archaeology. We will sit through mass beneath stone arches. We will trace the careful accounting of manorial dues. We will observe the ladders of hierarchy that shaped every breath of daily existence. And finally, we will enter the candlelit halls of a noble manor, where warmth, color, and comfort stand in quiet contrast to the fields outside. Let your breathing slow. Imagine the smell of damp earth, the faint sweetness of straw, the distant tolling of a bell that marks not just the hour, but the order of your life. Now you wake before dawn, and your day begins. You wake in darkness, not the deep silence of modern night, but a softer, shifting darkness, pierced by the faint shuffle of animals in the byre beside your cottage. A cow exhales, a chicken rustles. The air is thick with the scent of straw, smoke, and wool. Your home is small. Timber beams, wattle and daub walls, a packed earth floor, cool beneath your bare feet. There is no glass in the window opening, only a shutter. A thin thread of early gray light seeps through its edges. You're already tired. You went to sleep shortly after sunset. There was no candle to waste. And yet the body never feels entirely rested, because work here does not end. It merely pauses. You are a villain, a bound peasant, in a medieval English village, perhaps in the 12th or 13th century. The land around you is organized in long, narrow strips. This is the open field system. No neat fences, no tidy hedgerows dividing private property. Instead, great communal fields stretch outward, divided into strips allocated to families like yours. You do not own your strip. You hold it. In exchange, you owe labor. And today is not your own day. You step outside. The air is wet with dawn mist. Grass beads with moisture against your ankles. Somewhere across the village green, another door creaks open. No one speaks much at this hour. Words are saved for when they are necessary. You eat quickly. A crust of coarse bread, made from barley or rye. Perhaps a little pottage left from the night before. Oats boiled with leeks, maybe flavored faintly with salt if you are fortunate. Meat is rare, reserved for feast days, or if an animal can no longer work. The taste is plain, earthy, functional. Food here is fuel. The sun rises slowly, pale behind drifting cloud. You shoulder a wooden plowshare, worn smooth by use. If your village is fortunate, the plow is heavy and iron-tipped, pulled by oxen owned collectively or by the Lord. More often, it is simple and stubborn, catching on roots and stones. Your hands are already rough. You walk to the Lord's domain, the portion of land reserved not for peasants, but for the manor itself. Before you tend your own strips, you must tend his. 3 days a week, sometimes more during harvest, your labor belongs to him. The soil is thick with clay. It clings to your boots. Each step pulls slightly backward, as if the earth resists being turned. You push. You guide. You coax the oxen forward. The rhythm becomes steady. Press, step, breathe. Press, step, breathe. The wind moves across the open field unobstructed. In winter it cuts. In summer it dries your throat. Today it is mild, but the work is not. There is no dramatic suffering. No shouting overseer cracking whips. Instead, there is something quieter, a steady, unquestioned expectation. You will work, because you must, because this arrangement has always existed, because your father did the same. The morning stretches long. Time is measured not in minutes, but in tasks. One furrow. Then another. The sun climbs. Your shoulders burn beneath coarse wool. Sweat gathers at your collar. By mid-morning, your stomach tightens again. Work sharpens hunger. You pause briefly to drink from a shared jug. Small ale, weak and safe compared to uncertain water. It tastes sour but steady. You glance toward your own strip of land in the distance. You will tend it later, if there is light left. If there is strength left. Around you, the landscape is deceptively peaceful. Skylarks rise into open sky. A line of trees marks the boundary of common pasture. Sheep graze under the watch of a village child. But beneath this calm lies constant calculation. Will the harvest be enough? Will rain come too early? Too late? Will the Lord increase dues this year? You are not free to leave. Not easily. The law binds you to this manor. Marriage requires permission. Travel requires permission. Even grinding your grain must be done at the Lord's mill, for a fee. By midday, your arms tremble faintly. Not dramatically. Just enough to remind you that this work does not pause for comfort. When harvest season comes, the rhythm intensifies. Entire families move into the fields. Sickles sweep through wheat. Bundles are tied. The sun hangs overhead, relentless. Every sheaf matters, because from this yield will come rent, tithe, seed for next year, and food for winter. And winter is always coming. By late afternoon, you finally return to your own strip. The soil here is no kinder. You weed. You check for blight. You pray quietly, not in elaborate words, but in habit. Let the crop hold. Let the weather stay gentle. The church bell rings faintly from the village center. Its sound carries across the fields, soft but commanding. It marks the hour for prayer, and it marks the boundaries of your world. As evening approaches, the sky softens into amber. Smoke rises from cottage roofs. Your body feels heavy now, not with pain exactly, but with use. You walk home slowly. Inside, your wife tends a small fire. The children sit close for warmth. Supper is pottage again. Perhaps cabbage. Perhaps beans. Perhaps nothing added at all. You eat quietly. There is no complaint, because this is simply life. Afterward, you mend a tool by firelight. The glow flickers against rough wooden walls. Shadows shift gently. Outside, a dog barks once, then settles. You lie down on a straw mattress. The thatch above whispers faintly in the wind. Your muscles hum with dull fatigue. Tomorrow will be similar, and the day after, and the season after that. There are feast days, yes. Moments of laughter. Weddings. Markets. But they are brief islands in a wide sea of routine. And that is why you would not last a day. Not because it is violent. Not because it is dramatic. But because it is constant. Unrelieved. Measured in furrows, in bells, in seasons. Measured in obligations owed before comfort is allowed. As sleep comes, you do not dream of escape. You dream of weather. And in the morning, before the sun rises again, you will wake. Long before your boots pressed into the clay of an English manor, before your name was written into any tally of dues, the shape of your world was altered by a man who crossed the channel with quiet determination. His name was William. He was not yet called the Conqueror. Titles come later, after outcomes are certain. At first, he was simply Duke of Normandy, a child who inherited power too early, in a land where strength was tested swiftly and often. William's early life was not gentle. Born around 1028, the illegitimate son of Duke Robert I of Normandy, his claim to authority was contested from the start. In a society where lineage mattered deeply, the word bastard followed him like a shadow. Several of his guardians were killed during his childhood. Assassination attempts circled him like distant storms. He survived not because life was kind, but because he learned to be patient. Patience would define him. Across the narrow stretch of water lay England, ruled by King Edward the Confessor. Edward had spent years in exile in Normandy and maintained ties with William's court. When Edward died in January 1066 without a clear heir, the English crown became uncertain, a crown without a settled head. Harold Godwin's son, a powerful English noble, was crowned king quickly. But William believed something else had been promised. that Edward had once indicated the throne would pass to him. Whether that promise was formal or imagined remains a matter historians discuss quietly. What matters is that William believed it enough to act. In the autumn of 1066, he gathered ships along the Norman coast. Wooden hulls creaked in harbors. Horses were loaded. Supplies counted. Oaths taken. The crossing to England was not dramatic in itself. It was careful, deliberate. When William landed near Pevensey, the English army was already exhausted from repelling a Norwegian invasion in the north. On October 14, 1066, at the Battle of Hastings, two forces met on a sloping field. We will not linger on the clash of weapons. Instead, consider the long hours, the tension, the shield walls standing firm, the slow fatigue that creeps into arms raised too long. Harold fell. The English resistance fractured. William did not become king that day, not fully. Conquest is not a single battle. It is a process of consolidation. He moved methodically. Castles rose across England, wooden at first, then stone. Motte and bailey structures dotted the countryside, visible reminders that authority had shifted. Where once Anglo-Saxon lords held estates, Norman nobles now stood in their place. Land was redistributed, and that redistribution would shape your life as a serf. William's most enduring administrative act came 20 years later, in 1086, the Domesday Book. A vast survey of land, livestock, mills, villages, and people across much of England. Commissioned not for curiosity but for taxation. Royal officials traveled from manor to manor, recording who held what, how much land was plowed, how many oxen worked it, how many villagers owed service. Your village, or one much like it, would have been counted. The Domesday Book did not invent feudal obligations, but it clarified them. It fixed them in record. It gave structure to hierarchy. At the top stood the king. Below him, tenants-in-chief, Norman lords granted large estates. Below them, lesser lords and knights. And below them you. William did not personally walk through your muddy field. He did not hear the bell that wakes you. But the system he solidified determines how many days you plow for the domain. It determines the rents collected, the services owed, the protections promised in exchange. The Norman conquest did more than change rulers. It altered language. French words entered court and law. Architectural styles shifted. Stone cathedrals began rising where wooden churches once stood. Even your vocabulary of power changed. Yet daily life in the village remained, in its rhythms, surprisingly continuous. The soil still needed turning. The barley still needed sowing. Winter still arrived without negotiation. The difference lay in who benefited most securely from the yield. William ruled until 1087. He was neither gentle nor chaotic. Chroniclers describe him as firm, even stern. His authority rested on land and loyalty, carefully balanced. By the time of his death, England was not merely conquered. It was reorganized. And centuries later, when you rise before dawn to tend strips of earth that are technically held of a lord who holds them, of the king, you are living within the framework William helped construct. You do not think of him as you press the plow forward, but his decisions echo quietly through the structure of your day. From contested inheritance to recorded taxation, from battlefield claim to measured governance, William's rise reshaped England into a kingdom where hierarchy became both visible and meticulously accounted for. The bells that ring across your village now do so under a Norman-built church tower. The lord who collects your dues may trace his title back to a grant given in 1066. And the field you work, divided into long communal strips, sits within a political order born of conquest and then carefully maintained. As we move forward, we will leave the immediate aftermath of conquest behind. But not for long, because in the 14th century, a different force will arrive on English shores, not carried by ships of war, but by quieter vessels of trade. And its consequences will be felt even more deeply than any invading army. For now, the plow continues its steady path, and history shifts beneath it, almost unnoticed. The change does not announce itself with banners. There are no ships bristling with soldiers this time, no armored horsemen riding inland beneath fluttering standards. Instead, the ships arrive quietly. They dock along the southern ports of England in 1348, at places like Melcombe Regis in Dorset. They carry wool, wine, cloth, and something else unseen. The holds creak as they always have. Sailors step onto wooden piers as they always have. And yet, within weeks, something unfamiliar begins to spread inland. At first, the reports are vague. A sudden fever, swollen glands, a weakness that overtakes even strong laborers. Villagers speak in hushed tones. Priests are summoned more frequently. Bells toll more often. You, as a medieval English serf, would not know the word bacterium. You would not understand transmission, nor fleas, nor rats that traveled unnoticed within cargo. You would only know that people who seemed well a few days ago now lie still in their cottages. The illness does not strike in a dramatic blaze. It moves like mist across fields, quiet, pervasive, difficult to escape. Within months, the disease that historians later call the Black Death sweeps through much of England. Modern estimates suggest that perhaps 1/3 to 1/2 of the population perished between 1348 and 1350. Entire villages were reduced to silence. Fields went unplowed. Livestock wandered unattended. In your village, daily rhythms falter. The open field system depends on cooperation. Neighbors plowing alongside neighbors, sharing oxen teams, repairing fences together. But when several households fall quiet, the communal system strains. The reeve struggles to organize work parties. The priest finds himself conducting burial rites day after day, his voice growing hoarse from repetition. Sometimes he too grows ill. We will not linger on physical suffering. Instead, consider absence. Empty stools at the long table. Untended strips of barley. A child's wooden toy left outside a cottage that no longer opens its door. The soundscape changes. Where once there was steady chatter and the scrape of tools, there is wind through thatch. Bells tolling more often than before. And then, gradually, even the bells grow quieter, because there are fewer hands to pull their ropes. The psychological weight is immense. Medieval Christians interpret events through a spiritual framework. Some believe the disease is divine punishment. Others search for signs in the sky, comets, strange weather, eclipses. There are whispers of blame placed on outsiders, on distant communities, on those perceived as different. Fear moves as swiftly as illness. And yet, amidst fear, there is adaptation. With so many labors gone, something subtle begins to shift in the balance of power between lord and peasant. Landowners find their fields half empty. Crops cannot be harvested without hands to cut them. Sheep require tending. Mills require grain. Surviving peasants, once easily replaced, suddenly find themselves in demand. Wages, where wages exist, begin to rise. Lords attempt to freeze them at pre-plague levels. In 1351, Parliament passes the Statute of Laborers, attempting to restrict wage increases and tie workers to their manors. But enforcement proves difficult. When labor is scarce, leverage grows. You might find that the Lord Steward now negotiates rather than commands. Perhaps you are offered slightly better terms to remain. Perhaps obligations are quietly reduced to keep families from fleeing to towns where wages are higher. The demographic collapse, though tragic, weakens the rigid structure of feudalism. Land becomes more available. Some villains manage to secure favorable leases. Others move to emerging market towns. The social order, once fixed like stone, begins to show hairline fractures. Archaeological evidence supports this transformation. In some regions, pollen records indicate a temporary return of wild vegetation. Fields left fallow as populations declined. Cemeteries from this period reveal hurried burials, sometimes in larger communal plots, though still accompanied by Christian rites. And yet life does resume. It always does. Children are born in the years after the plague. Houses are repaired. Strips of land are reassigned. The open field system continues, though altered. But something has changed in memory. You now live in a village that remembers emptiness. Older residents speak of the great pestilence in lowered voices. They recall which cottages once stood occupied. They remember the year when the bells rang too often. The Black Death does not abolish hierarchy overnight. Lords still collect rents. The church still presides over sacraments. Kings still claim authority. But beneath the surface, confidence in permanence has weakened. If half a village can vanish in a season, what else might change? Over the next decades, tensions simmer. Peasants, newly aware of their economic value, resist restrictions. Lords, wary of losing control, attempt to enforce tradition. This tension will one day culminate in open unrest. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381, though that lies slightly ahead in our story. For now, imagine yourself standing at the edge of your strip of land in the late 1350s. The air smells of damp earth and new barley shoots. There are fewer neighbors than before, but the field remains. You grip the wooden handle of your plow, aware, perhaps only faintly, that the world feels less fixed than it once did. The Black Death reshaped England not only in numbers, but in mindset. It reminded lords and serfs alike that life could be abruptly uncertain, that hierarchy did not guarantee immunity. And in that awareness, seeds of long-term transformation were quietly planted. As we move forward, we will leave the immediate shadow of pestilence and turn to something more tangible, a place where medieval life once thrived and then gradually disappeared. An abandoned village, its foundations still visible in grass, its story preserved not in chronicles but in soil. If you walk today through the rolling countryside of North Yorkshire, you may come upon a gentle slope where the grass forms subtle ridges and shallow depressions. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary field. Sheep graze. Wind moves softly over the hills. But beneath that grass lie the outlines of homes, lanes, and lives once lived. This is Warham Percy, now known as one of the best preserved deserted medieval villages in England. Unlike castles or cathedrals, which were built of stone and meant to endure, most medieval villages were made of earth, timber, and thatch. They were not designed for centuries. They were designed for survival. Warham Percy thrived from the 12th to the 15th century. At its height, perhaps 40 households lived there. Timber-framed houses lined a central track. Each cottage stood on a long, narrow plot, a toft, with small enclosures behind for animals and gardens. Imagine yourself there on an ordinary day. The path is muddy but well-worn. Smoke rises from low thatched roofs. Chickens scatter underfoot. A dog barks lazily near a doorway. Beyond the houses stretch the open fields, divided into strips, where villagers work side by side. Life here would have been familiar to you as a serf: barley, oats, beans. A cow or two, perhaps a few sheep. The rhythm of plowing, sowing, harvesting, repeated year after year. And then gradually something shifts. Archaeological layers at Warham Percy reveal subtle changes over time. Houses were rebuilt and expanded in the 13th century, suggesting growth and relative prosperity. But by the late 14th century, following the Black Death, population declines became evident. Fewer hearths, fewer repairs, some houses abandoned. By the 15th century, the village was in slow retreat. The reasons were not singular. Plague reduced population. Shifting economic priorities encouraged landlords to convert arable fields into sheep pastures. Wool was profitable. Sheep required fewer laborers than grain fields. The open field system, so dependent on communal effort, became less viable when households dwindled. At some point, likely in the late 15th century, the remaining villagers left. Some relocated to nearby settlements. Others sought opportunity in towns. The village did not burn dramatically. It did not collapse in a single catastrophic event. It simply emptied. What remains today are earthworks, shallow outlines marking former house platforms. The foundations of St. Martin's Church still stand, modest and weathered. Excavations throughout the 20th century uncovered pottery fragments, iron tools, animal bones, and personal items, traces of everyday life. Archaeologists pieced together domestic details from these fragments. They found evidence of simple wooden bowls, hand-forged nails, loom weights, and cooking pots blackened by smoke. Animal remains suggest diets of beef, mutton, pork, and grains. Occasional imported pottery hints at small connections to wider markets. There is even evidence of stress and hardship. In one controversial find, Archaeologists uncovered remains of individuals whose bones bore signs of post-mortem treatment, possibly linked to fears about revenants or restless spirits. This discovery suggests that medieval villagers, living close to mortality and superstition, sometimes responded to fear in ways that reflected their spiritual worldview. But again, there is no need to dwell on discomfort. Instead, consider the quiet dignity of the site. Warham Percy does not shout its history. It hums. Standing there today, you would see only contours and grass. But if you listen closely, if you allowed your imagination to soften, you might sense echoes of daily life. A woman carrying water from a stream, a child chasing a goose, a reeve measuring grain, the church bell ringing across fields that no longer exist in their medieval form. Deserted villages like Warham Percy are not unique, though they are among the best studied. Across England, thousands of medieval settlements vanished between the 14th and 16th centuries due to plague, enclosure, economic change, or environmental pressures. Their disappearance reflects a broader transformation of rural society. The feudal order, once tightly structured around labor obligations and communal agriculture, gradually gave way to new patterns of landholding and market-oriented production. For you, as a medieval serf, such transformation would not feel like historical evolution. It would feel like uncertainty, neighbors leaving, fields reallocated, the Lord deciding to fence land for sheep. The slow dissolution of familiar boundaries. Warham Percy is a reminder that medieval life was not static. Villages grew and shrank. People moved. Economies shifted. What seemed permanent could quietly dissolve. And yet, within that dissolution, continuity persisted. Church stones remained. Paths left faint impressions. Memory lingered in place names and field boundaries. The study of Warham Percy offers modern historians a rare window into the intimate scale of medieval existence, not through royal chronicles or battlefield accounts, but through hearth ash and pottery shards, through the ordinary. And it is the ordinary that tells us the most about what it meant to live as a serf. As we leave the grassy outlines of this vanished village, we turn from soil to spirit, from foundations of earth to foundations of belief. For medieval life was not sustained by labor alone. It was shaped day by ritual, by prayer, by the steady toll of church bells marking the passage of sacred time. If you were a medieval English serf, your life would not be measured only in seasons of plowing and harvest. It would also be measured in bells. The church bell marked your days as reliably as the sun. It rang for morning mass, for funerals, for weddings, for feast days. Its sound drifted across fields and hedgerows, over grazing animals and half-plowed strips of earth. You may not have owned the land you worked. You may not have been free to leave the manor. But you belonged unquestionably to the parish. The parish church stood at the center of your spiritual world. Built of stone, often modest but enduring, it was one of the few structures in your village meant to last generations. Inside, the air smelled faintly of damp stone and beeswax candles. Light filtered through small windows, illuminating painted saints on the walls. You did not attend church casually. Attendance was expected. It was woven into obligation and custom. On Sundays, you gathered with your neighbors, the same people who shared your fields and your burdens. You stood during Mass, listening to Latin prayers you likely did not fully understand. The priest, more educated than most villagers, acted as mediator between heaven and earth. The rhythm of the liturgical year shaped your sense of time. Advent led to Christmas, Lent to Easter. Harvest festivals gave thanks for grain safely gathered. Saints' days punctuated the calendar, offering moments of celebration amid labor. On certain feast days, work paused, ale flowed, music played. Even the strict order of village life softened for a while. Religion was not distant theology. It was immediate and practical. You prayed for good weather, for healthy animals, for protection from illness, for relief from famine. The boundary between spiritual and physical life was porous. A failed harvest might be interpreted as divine displeasure. A recovery from sickness could be attributed to a saint's intercession. Pilgrimages offered rare opportunities for travel. If you saved enough coin, or traveled in a small group. You might journey to shrines such as Canterbury, where the relics of Thomas Becket drew visitors from across England. The road would be long, the inns sparse, but pilgrimage offered both spiritual merit and a brief widening of your world. Inside the church, visual storytelling filled the gaps left by Latin sermons. Wall paintings depicted biblical scenes: Noah's Ark, the Last Judgment, the Nativity. These images instructed the illiterate and reinforced moral lessons. Fear and comfort existed side by side. The medieval Christian worldview included heaven and hell with equal certainty. Sermons described reward and punishment, yet they also offered reassurance. Confession could cleanse sin, charity could earn favor, faithful obedience could secure salvation. Death, ever present in medieval life, was not considered an abrupt end but a transition. Funerals were communal affairs. The churchyard, often surrounding the parish church, held generations of villagers. You might work in fields bordered by the graves of ancestors. In this way, faith tethered past and present together. Religious guilds sometimes formed within villages or nearby towns. These associations supported members during illness, funded candles for church altars, and ensured proper burial rites. Belonging to a guild provided a modest sense of security in an uncertain world. Yet ritual life also reinforced hierarchy. The priest held authority. The tithe, typically 1/10 of produce, supported the church. Lords sometimes influenced clerical appointments. Religion, while offering comfort, was woven into systems of power. Still, for you as a serf, faith was less about politics and more about rhythm. The repetition of prayers, the quiet murmur of liturgy, the familiar kneeling on worn stone floors. In winter, when daylight faded early and work slowed, evenings might include storytelling that blended Christian themes with older folk traditions. Superstitions persisted alongside doctrine. Charms against illness, belief in spirits lingering at crossroads. The boundaries between official teaching and village custom were not always sharply drawn. Medieval Christianity in rural England was lived, not theorized. It shaped your sense of right and wrong. It provided explanation for suffering. It offered hope beyond hardship. And in a life defined by obligation to lord, to land, to season, faith introduced a different kind of belonging, to eternity. As the bell tolls softly in the distance, we move from matters of the soul to matters of survival in another sense. For belief sustained you spiritually, but grain, labor, and obligation sustained the manor itself. Now we turn to the structure that governed your daily toil. The manorial economy, that intricate web of rents, duties, and carefully measured strips of land. If faith shaped your inner life, the manor shaped everything else. The manor was not simply a house. It was a system, a carefully balanced structure of land, labor, obligation, and expectation. It determined where you worked, how much you owed, and how much you kept. You did not own your fields outright. Instead, you held strips of land scattered across large, open fields. This was the open field system, long, narrow strips of earth, unfenced, stretching in parallel lines across gently rolling countryside. From a distance, the fields looked like patchwork. Up close, they were practical divisions of soil, carefully allocated and recorded. Your strips were not adjacent. They were spread out deliberately, ensuring that no single family received only fertile or only poor soil. Fairness, of a sort, was built into the system, though the system itself was not optional. At the center of the manor stood the lord's domain, land reserved exclusively for the lord's benefit. Several days a week, you worked not on your own strips, but on his. This was labor service. You plowed his fields. You harvested his grain. You repaired his fences. You cut his wood. You did so because your right to live and farm on the manor depended upon it. The rhythm of your week was divided accordingly. Certain days belonged to you and your family. Certain days belonged to your lord. In busy seasons, especially harvest, your obligations increased. The lord's crops took priority. Your own fields waited until his were secured. Payment rarely involved coin. Instead, it came through service and produce. You owed rents, sometimes in grain, sometimes in chickens or eggs, sometimes in coin if the manor had begun transitioning toward cash payments. You owed fees for using the mill to grind your grain, fees for baking bread in the communal oven, fees for grazing animals in common pastures. Even life's milestones carried costs. To marry, you might pay a fine. To inherit your father's holding, another fee. These payments were known as Harriet or Merchet, small but significant reminders that your life was entangled with the Lord's authority. The manor court met regularly, often in the Great Hall or in an open space near it. Here disputes were settled. Fines were issued for minor infractions, letting animals stray, neglecting duties, breaking village customs. The reeve, chosen from among the villagers, supervised daily agricultural work and represented peasant concerns. He was both neighbor and overseer, walking a careful line between loyalty to community and loyalty to Lord. The system functioned because it was interdependent. You relied on common pasture to graze your animals. You relied on neighbors to plow cooperatively. You relied on shared tools and shared knowledge. Isolation would have meant failure. Yet the system also constrained you. Leaving the manor without permission could result in punishment. Marrying outside the estate required approval. Your movement was limited not by walls, but by law and custom. The seasons dictated the pace. Autumn harvest required coordinated effort. Sheaves of grain stood in neat rows, drying in late sunlight. The entire village worked together, cutting, bundling, stacking. Winter brought slower tasks, repairing tools, mending fences, caring for animals in enclosed yards. Spring meant plowing heavy soil with oxen. The wooden plow creaked. The oxen's breath steamed in cool air. Mud clung to boots and hems. Year after year, the pattern repeated. Grain was stored carefully in barns. Livestock represented security. Sheep for wool, pigs for meat, cows for milk. Losses from disease or bad weather could unsettle the fragile balance. And yet, within this rigid structure, gradual changes were unfolding. By the later Middle Ages, especially after demographic shifts caused by the Black Death, labor shortages increased peasants' bargaining power. Some labor services were commuted into money rents. Mobility, though limited, expanded in certain regions. But for much of the medieval period, the manorial economy defined your world. It was stable, predictable, and slow to change. It tied land to labor, labor to obligation, obligation to hierarchy, and hierarchy, as we will soon explore more directly, shaped not only your economic position, but your very identity. Because to live on the manor was not merely to work within it. It was to know your place within a layered structure of power. Now, as we move from fields and rents to titles and authority, we turn to the framework that held it all together, feudal law and hierarchy. If the manor organized your labor, feudal law organized your place in the world. You were not simply a farmer. You were a villain, or perhaps a cotar, or a boarder, categories that carried weight. These words described your rights, your duties, your limits. They were not casual labels. They were legal definitions. Above you stood the lord of the manor. Above him, perhaps, a greater lord. Above them all, the king. This layered structure was often described as a chain, not always visible, but always present. Each link bound to another through oaths, land grants, and service. The system had grown gradually after the Norman conquest, shaped by custom as much as by written law. When William the Conqueror claimed England in 1066, he redistributed land to loyal followers. In return, they swore allegiance and promised military support. Land was the foundation of power, but land required labor. And so, your labor became part of a larger political structure stretching far beyond your village. In theory, the arrangement was reciprocal. The Lord offered protection. You offered service. The Lord provided justice in his court. You submitted to his authority. In practice, the balance leaned heavily upward. Feudal law was a mixture of royal decrees, local custom, and oral tradition. Much of it was unwritten. It lived in memory, in precedent, in the decisions of elders and stewards. If your pig wandered into another strip, the manor court addressed it. If you failed to appear for required labor, fines followed. If disputes arose over inheritance, witnesses spoke to confirm what had always been done. The king's courts, distant and formal, dealt with greater matters. But for most of your life, justice was local, immediate, and communal. Social mobility was limited. You were born into your status. A serf's child became a serf. Freedom, while possible, was rare. Some towns offered pathways to liberty. Town air makes free, the saying went, but reaching such places required permission or escape. An escape carried risk. The hierarchy was reinforced not only by law, but by daily ritual. You removed your cap before a superior. You bowed slightly. You stepped aside on narrow paths. Language itself reflected difference. Titles, my lord, sir, master, were not mere politeness. They were acknowledgments of structure. Clothing reinforced it too. Your tunic was plain wool, undyed or muted in color. Practical. Your lord's garments bore richer dyes, deep reds, vibrant blues, costly pigments imported through long trade networks. Even at a distance, hierarchy was visible. Food likewise marked division. You ate coarse bread and porridge. The lord dined on fine white bread, roasted meats, imported spices. Law and custom maintained these separations carefully. Sumptuary laws sometimes regulated what certain classes could wear, ensuring boundaries remained visible. Authority extended into family life. Marriage required approval. Inheritance followed established lines. Even your time was not entirely your own. Feast days, labor days, court days structured the calendar. And yet, feudal hierarchy was not static stone. It was human. Lords depended on productive tenants. Tenants depended on stable leadership. Conflicts arose, negotiations occurred. After the Black Death, labor shortages shifted certain balances. Peasants in some regions demanded better terms. Revolts, like the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, revealed underlying tensions. But even rebellion acknowledged the structure it resisted. The system endured because it was woven into landholding, law, economy, and belief. You understood your world through this hierarchy. It defined expectations. It limited ambition. It provided, in its own constrained way, stability. There was comfort in knowing your obligations, even if they were heavy. You rose before dawn because generations before you had done the same. You bowed because your father had bowed. The chain extended backward as well as upward. And yet, while you labored under layered authority, another life unfolded within the same countryside, one of relative comfort, space, and ornament. To understand the full contrast, we must leave your thatched cottage and step into the great hall of a noble manor. Leave the narrow lane of packed earth. Step past the low cottages and their drifting smoke. Walk instead toward the manor house. It rises gently above the village, not a castle of towering stone in most cases, but a substantial timber or stone structure, larger and more ordered than the homes surrounding it. Its presence is quiet but unmistakable. This is where your lord resides. The great hall is the heart of the manor. When you enter, the ceiling lifts high above you, dark wooden beams crossing overhead. Light filters through narrow windows, softened by oiled cloth or shutters. Rushes cover the floor, strewn with herbs to sweeten the air. At the far end stands the dais, a slightly raised platform. Upon it rests the high table, where the lord and his family dine. Position matters here. Height matters. Even furniture reflects hierarchy. The lord's chair is sturdier, carved, sometimes cushioned. Others sit on benches or stools. The arrangement of bodies within the room mirrors the arrangement of power outside it. The walls may be adorned with tapestries. Not merely decoration, but insulation against cold stone. The woven scenes depict hunts, biblical stories, or heraldic symbols, quiet reminders of lineage and status. In winter, a central hearth warms the hall. Smoke drifts upward toward a vent in the roof. It lingers, faint but persistent. The air is warmer than your cottage, though still far from modern comfort. Meals here differ markedly from yours. Trenchers of fine white bread serve as plates. Roasted meats, venison, beef, poultry, are seasoned with spices acquired through long trade networks. Salted fish appears during fasting days. Ale and wine are poured generously. Conversation unfolds in measured tones. Stewards discuss harvest yields. Bailiffs report on rents collected. News from neighboring estates circulates slowly but steadily. Time moves differently in the manor. The Lord does not plow fields. He oversees them. He does not reap barley. He calculates how much is owed. His responsibilities are managerial, political, social. He must maintain loyalty upward, to greater lords or to the crown, and authority downward, among tenants and servants. His day may include reviewing accounts, hearing disputes in the manor court, inspecting livestock, corresponding with other landholders. Literacy, while not universal among nobles, is more common here than in your cottage. Documents are kept. Seals pressed into wax formalize agreements. Family life also unfolds within these walls. Children of noble birth receive training suited to their station. Instruction in manners, writing, perhaps basic reading of Latin prayers. Daughters learn household management, embroidery, the careful supervision of servants. Marriage is strategy. Alliances matter. Dowries are negotiated with quiet calculation. Religion permeates this space as well. A private chapel or prayer alcove may be set aside. Candles flicker before painted panels of saints. Priests are sometimes retained to conduct regular services for the household. The rhythms of feast and fast are observed with dignity. Feast days bring musicians, perhaps a harpist or traveling minstrel, who performs epics and romances. Stories of chivalry echo beneath the beams. For a moment, hardship seems distant, but it is not absent. Noble life carries its own anxieties, disputes over inheritance, political rivalries, expectations of loyalty. The stability of a manor can shift with royal favor or disfavor. Still, compared to your daily labor, this world appears measured, spacious, insulated. Your cottage is cramped. The manor hall stretches wide. You eat porridge. They dine on spiced meat. You measure seasons by aching muscles. They measure them by account books and obligations. And yet, both lives are bound to the same fields. The grain you sow feeds the table in this hall. The rents you pay maintain its tapestries. The bells that ring for you ring for them as well. Noble comfort rests quietly upon peasant endurance. The countryside functions because each layer supports the next. From muddy strip fields to timbered great halls, from barley porridge to roasted venison, a single agricultural system sustains all. And as evening settles over manor and village alike, candles flicker in both places, though in different numbers. The same wind passes over both roofs. The same church bell marks the hour. As we draw gently to a close, picture the English countryside at dusk. The open fields stretch outward, divided into narrow strips, their boundaries subtle but meaningful. Beyond them, the manor house stands quietly against the fading light. For centuries, this landscape shaped lives in ways both visible and invisible. You rose before dawn. You plowed, sowed, harvested. You fulfilled dues measured in grain and labor. Above you, lords governed estates, administered justice, and dined beneath carved beams. Above them, kings claimed authority over realms stitched together through conquest and custom. The system was not simple. It was layered, habitual, enduring. It bound people to land, to duty, to expectation. Life as a medieval English serf was marked by monotony, by hierarchy, by physical exertion that modern bodies rarely know. And yet, it was also marked by community, by shared rituals, by the steady rhythm of seasons that offered a certain predictability. The bell rang, the plow turned, the bread baked, fields fed castles, castles governed fields. Today we wake to different rhythms. Food arrives without our sowing. Shelter stands without our thatching. Law exists in distant institutions rather than manor courts beneath timber beams. The hardships of that world feel remote. And yet, its quiet endurance shaped the foundations of modern society. Property law, governance, agriculture, and social organization. As you settle now into your own rest, perhaps notice the contrast. Your room is warm. Your meal required no tithes. Your evening passes without fear of tomorrow's compulsory labor. The fields lie centuries behind you. The manor hall has grown silent. But in the hush of imagination, you can still hear the soft rustle of barley in the wind, the distant toll of a church bell, and the steady footsteps of those who worked the land long before industrial smoke ever touched the horizon. Let that rhythm slow your thoughts. Let the repetition of seasons quiet the mind, and drift gently into sleep,